Some of you may become somewhat uncomfortable as parts of this film unfold, but I think if you listen carefully...
Nature has intended that you
A healthy, happy sex life is a most wonderful and terribly unpleasant. We've all experienced curiosity about ourselves and the opposite sex. Who hasn't?
Willkommen, mein Lieben. I'm Megan.
I'm Marcella.
And I'm Colin.
And welcome to
Remedial Sex
Ed.
So this is a fun little fact about myself, but I have had a long life obsession with burlesque and cabaret style performances. I don't know even how many of my close friends know that about me, but I am obsessed with it.
Have you considered doing it?
Of course I have. So I've taken classes, and I have a ton of the wardrobe. Like, I actually have quite a few corsets and, like, things that would go well into... I have my burlesque aesthetic down.
Okay.
What gets me is my crippling stage fright, which is why I went to stage crew in the first place.
Got it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, one day...
It's a real shame that I'm the sole beneficiary of this obsession.
Is it a shame, though?
Not for me.
Are you pretty pleased? Colin, question to you. How would you do with Megan performing in her underwear on stage?
It would take a little getting used to, I think, but I'd be I'd like it. I'd be supportive.
Ah,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
I'm into this.
One day, and I can't quite figure out what my MC name would be, because my real dream is to be a burlesque MC, spelled E-M-C-E. But I just, every time I try and think of a name, I can't quite get there. And my core belief is, once I know what my name would be, I'm ready.
Man, I got nothing. I wanted to give you that moment right here on the pod and then announce the day that Megan was going to be performing, but we're not there yet.
Not there yet. Like, I've thought about it. I've been Madame Megara. I was thinking, even on top of that, of doing the Madame Min, which is both Merlin and a Disney reference, which I'm kind of into.
That sounds right.
Like, I know exactly what my costume would be. Like, I'd be very kind of old school 1930s, circus host. So, like, the top hat and a cane, both, with rhinestones all over it, with a black sequin waistcoat and shorts up to here.
Kind of rockabilly steampunk look.
No steampunk. No. Different. Very different. But, I'm very into the white, black, red color scheme, a lot of pinstripes. I've put in some serious thought into my persona as a burlesque host. And...
You'd be a very good MC. You would remind me of the MC when we went to the Puppet Burlesque show.
Oh, yeah.
I remember that?
I
We
do.
had a really good MC.
Mm-hmm. So... I guess I kind of skipped a step going straight into my obsession with burlesque. This is Remedial
that's
Sex
perfect.
Ed. We're an educational sex ed podcast.
Yes, we are. We decided.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Sometimes the education part is a tad dubious, I think.
Sure. I mean, none of us are professionals. We're all doing this as an exploration into what we need to learn, because we all grew up in a very conservative state that did not teach sex ed at all.
That's right. Perfect. Couldn't put it any better.
Yeah.
And I won't.
That's it. That's what we do.
That is what we do. So thanks for joining us, old listeners, new listeners, people who have been tricked into listening.
Yeah.
We have a very
Friends that we've
enthusiastic
guilted into
bus
this.
driver. Yeah, friends.
Mostly that.
So I know I've dragged Colin to a fair share of burlesque shows. Marcella, I assume that you've been to a handful yourself.
I may be a regular at a burlesque joint in New York City, and
Nice.
it may be the number one thing I do when visitors come visit me.
Nice.
How come I haven't gone with you
Yeah,
yet?
you'll have to take us.
I mean, yeah, that is really strange. I was thinking about it, and I think every single person that has visited me has gone to this location, the Slipper Room, and I don't think I've took you to,
Nope.
which is weird.
Very.
Very weird.
What did we do when you were here?
When you come visit us, we can go to Harvell's in Long Beach, which is the burlesque theater. We went to a jazz show there once. Great space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh, there's some good jazz in New York City. Okay, well, we should probably stop creating all of our travel plans.
Yep.
And focus on, hey, guess what, listeners? This episode is about burlesque.
Yay.
So, originally I was going to kind of give like a lecture teaching series on the history of burlesque, what is burlesque, and the more I was kind of framing out the history of burlesque, it kind of took on a new life form, and it became the history of adult performances, mostly in America, but I actually have quite a few international notes here, so it's taken on a life of its own. Once you actually expand the definition of A, what is burlesque, and B, kind of where it originated from and how it's evolved throughout the years. And also because very recently in recording time, we had the Super Bowl performance that featured Jennifer Lopez getting on a pole for a very quick pole dancing segment, kind of as a shout out to her recent movie Hustlers, where she played a stripper, a real life stripper who ended up drugging a bunch of Wall Street guys and taking a ton of money from them.
Really?
Yeah.
Dang, I should go see that.
I really enjoyed the movie. I thought J-Lo absolutely rocked the pole. Like it made me feel things. It made me feel the same things that I felt when I watched Magic Mike, like that moment with Channing Tatum when he's I'm saying his name wrong. I know I am.
Channing.
Channing
Tatum.
When he's doing the spin and then he comes down, and it's a very male kind of hip thrust lead into everything else, which I'm into.
Yeah, for me, the mere commercials just made me feel inadequate because she's 50 and in way better shape than I will ever be in my entire life.
Oh my God. Like, it's amazing. Both her and Shakira.
It's absurd. It's amazing. It's incredible. Also, shout out to Shakira at that Super Bowl performance because, oh my God, the belly dancing, what an art form.
Yeah. The whole thing was just mwah, just a bunch of mwah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Don't get me started. I'll go very into like Latin Hispanic pride and what an amazing experience it was to have that featured on a national highlight and all of the subtle political things that she did with her show. So let's just not touch it.
That could be a whole nother episode.
I'm going to start with burlesque, and I just want to open with the fact that adult dancing, like seduction over dance, has been a thing since always. And there are the cave paintings in southern France that show kind of these rituals, mostly aimed for women towards a fertility goddess. This, of course, got twisted from being like a religious thing into a male arousal thing, which is a common thread through like every form of sensual dance. It always leads back to male arousement. And that's true of belly dancing as well. Belly dancing was originally formed as for women only. And the way that belly dancing is kind of formed is it helps with the hip muscles and also with the abdomen. And it's supposed to help guide you through childbirth. It's supposed to give you the foundation for that.
Really?
Yeah, that was how it was originally formed. Even though it originally started as just for women only, in the 14th century, men were already tossing coins at belly dancers. So if you Google the definition of burlesque, it comes up with two definitions that are sponsored by the Oxford Dictionary. And the first definition is an absurd or comically exaggerated imitation of something, especially in a literary or dramatic work. It's a parody. And the second definition is a variety show, typically including striptease.
Ah, so that's where that comes from.
So, both definitions are correct. Now, burlesque, when in its original form, is very different than how we view burlesque today, especially in America. So the first interpretation of burlesque performance originated in the 17th century in Italian theater as a type of comic interlude. So imagine that you are at an opera, or if you were in the UK, you'd be at a Shakespeare-styled play, and in the middle, there's just this, 5-minute interlude of madness.
Nice.
In it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm down with it. Is this a commedia dell'arte thing?
Mm-hmm. So,
okay.
Basically, burlesque didn't really start as, a striptease kind of thing. It was purely to make fun of the upper class for even attending opera in the first place.
So that's where the parody definition comes from? Got it.
Yeah. And it was like this for several centuries. But the belief that it was never sexual is actually not true, because anyone who is into comedy knows that some of the easiest comedy to take away from is to make it sexual. Mm-hmm. So it's always had sexual undertones, but it hasn't always been naked, if that's a good way to define it.
That makes sense.
All right.
Yeah.
So for centuries in Europe, burlesque was a political satire. And some Europeans mistakenly believe that it was America that turned it into a sexual show, but that's not true.
Ha-ha.
Yeah, suck it,
We're
Europeans.
not always the sinners. That's right. Take that.
As I said, it's always kind of had sexual undertones. There is a very world-famous burlesque dancer in modern days by the name of Dita Van Teese. She is currently credited as the Queen of Burlesque, and she's incredibly good. And her two home bases are Los Angeles and Paris, which I think is fabulous. And then, so she believes that there are even accounts of burlesque-style satire in 5th century BC Athens.
Really?
Yeah.
Cool.
I
on a
want to know
vase?
so much more.
Yeah.
So Aristophanes was the playwright, poet, and reformer who penned
Lysistrata.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, I needed that.
Okay.
The sexy masterpiece in which the wives of Athenian soldiers holed up in the Acropolis are depriving their husbands of sex until the termination of the Peloponnesian War. So, from Dita Von Teese's definition of burlesque, it's all about the sexual teasing, especially of men. And so, in her kind of definition, any play that kind of explicitly does this has a burlesque style to it. And I have a tendency to agree with her, because burlesque even takes it outside of revealing the parts of your body. Sexual tension and teasing very frequently comes through vocal teasing. And that's very true of burlesque style performances even to today. That's why they all have an MC who interacts with the audience.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, with all of these kind of performance, very heavily word and vaudeville style performances of burlesque, this carried through until the mid-1800s, where simultaneously both the United Kingdom and the United States started introducing skin into the game and taking off clothes and dancing. So, while this was going on in the United States for about 50 years or so, the first major Broadway performance of scandalous burlesque was brought over from London.
Ooh.
Ha-ha.
So, burlesque was popular in London from the 1830s to the 1890s. The Royal Strand Theatre, which still exists, back then had a particular specialty in burlesque performances. In London from the 1830s to the 1890s, burlesque was defined as risque panto performances and featured women in risque costumes. And then in the 1890s, this was replaced by Edwardian musical comedy. So burlesque actually died in the United Kingdom long before it phased out in America. Now, if I was to ask, since both of you were trained in America as actors, if I was to ask you what a panto is, how would you define it as an American actor?
Not a thing. Unless you're talking about pantomime. Sorry. I guess I would define pantomime as any wordless performance.
So that is very frequently how Americans define it. Marcella, do you already know where I'm going with this, or?
I know, and all of my teachers are going to be mad at me later because we totally studied this.
So panto is a really common type of performance in England. It very commonly happens over Christmas, and basically what it is an over-the-top play, frequently featuring like a children's story. So like there's pantos of Aladdin and like Sleeping Beauty, and basically it's just completely overacted, over makeuped, over costumed, and audience participation is encouraged. So for burlesque, like it was really easy to take that kind of over the top performance and make it sexy.
Gotcha.
Which is what the Brits did.
Like a sexy kabuki.
Mm-hmm. So this is going on in the mid to late 1800s. In America, there wasn't really a formal like burlesque performance organized yet. They were very common in like saloon type theaters. But the first official on-stage tease was a traveling British performance group organized by Lydia Thompson and her group, the British Blondes. So she came over in 1868. And what their group was famous for was 1868 was like the height of Victorian style. So very strict rules on having your hair up, clothing up to your neck, down to your wrist, all the way down to the ground. And they thought this was ridiculous. So as a British satire of Victorian etiquette, they would send the dancers out in a corset and tights. So technically, they were still covered from head to toe, but it was in like a body-colored suit.
Ah.
Yeah. I've tried that rule with dress codes before, wearing like see-through shirts that were like from top to bottom and being like, what? It meets your rules. And my employer didn't like that.
So, and then Lydia Thompson she had the burlesque attitude behind her. Like, she was all about teasing the audience. She would flirt with them, tell about how she'd always go to sleep all dressed in her finest jewelry, like very kind of getting the gossip around her there to say that she was a scandalous woman, but a fun one. And so she was kind of like, I don't want to call her the original MC because this type of performance had been going on for a while, but she was like the first one in America to be big in lights, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once she came over with her British blondes and tights, the United States absolutely loved it, and they latched onto it. So getting girls dressed only in tights to go do kick lines, to do dances where they were removing bits of clothing became very popular, but it was still kind of embodied in this overall performance that was still a satire.
Gotcha. And I guess, looking back, all the burlesque shows that we've been to have had some kind of satirical element. Like, the first one I ever went to was a Star Wars burlesque, which I guess you could say is a satire or an homage.
Yeah, it's parody.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, parody.
So I've uploaded a bunch of photos to our drive, just because burlesque is still a visual element that I am now trying to describe with words.
Paint us a mind picture, Megan.
And so the ones that I have here, the base ones, are kind of the early days of American burlesque, when the camera was actually a thing. So these are the turn of the century burlesque dancers. And
this will all be on our Instagram, by the way.
Yeah.
So
yes, we'll put it in the show notes.
But
as well.
you can see that there's one picture of Ella Chapman where she is dressed fully from head to toe in her definition of a suit of armor. And she's got a nice little headdress. Still part, even though there's not much skin showing, still part of burlesque because she's there obviously doing a satire on some soldier. Mm-hmm. And then, let's see if... But you start seeing legs.
I am seeing some leg.
Which are very scandalous in this time and day and age. Also, those corsets are redonkulous.
They're still wearing tights, though.
Mm-hmm. She's not.
Oh, she's not. No, there's some leg.
There's, I think, a classic photo that needs to probably make it on our Instagram of when we start seeing more what we would start seeing in burlesque performance, where Jenny Lee is covered in pearls, and she's got a nice little cape and heels, and same thing. Like, pearls are a big thing in burlesque fashion. Fringe is a big thing. Satin-based corsets. Like, this is when we start seeing classic things that'll continue to show up even through modern-day performances.
Gotcha.
Yeah. The top hat thing. And then let me see if I can find it. My absolute favorite of all of these photos is a photo called The Devil's Auction, where a girl is wearing a horse head.
Yeah, listener, she's kind of wearing a pretty good-looking mask of a horse, or is that a real horse's head? It looks very real.
Horse's head.
She's wearing it on top of her head. It's pretty wild. It looks good.
I want to know the performance number base behind this. Like, it's spectacular. She's got a butt with a tail coming out of it. She's still showing some leg, starting to see some cleavage. So it's a sexy horse costume.
Yup. You can sure say that.
Now, that was burlesque performance in America and the United Kingdom. The UK kind of stuck with the naughty panto format. Like, they were happy with satire and scantily clad women, and it kind of stuck there for the most part. American burlesque kept getting raunchier and raunchier.
Seems right. Seems pure.
So, influenced by minstrel shows and leg shows, American burlesque was closer in form to sketch performance.
What's a leg show?
It's when... So this was popular back at the turn of the century and also in the mid-1800s, where the girl would be standing behind a curtain and just stick her leg out.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, again, American burlesque, I think, started off similar in the sense of, like, a naughty panto, but then it became more and more focused on the striptease.
Gotcha.
And then more scandalous than American burlesque was Parisian burlesque.
That sounds right. Sounds good.
Henry James described Paris in the late 19th century as a massive flower of national decadence, the biggest temple ever built to material joys and the lust of the eyes.
Oh, I'm into it.
I like it.
I missed my time.
So this is the time when the famous Moulin Rouge really came into its power. You also have the famous cafe, I'm going to say it wrong, and I'm looking at Colin because I know I'm going to say it wrong, but the Chat de Noir.
Uh-huh, sure.
Yeah. They would feature both poets and burlesque dancers. Great place to be.
Yeah.
And different...
Two equally sexy art forms, in my opinion.
Says the English major.
So, different from the US and the UK, any girl in Paris, no matter background, could transcend class on stage. So, anyone could perform, any race. Like, a problem that has been featured even on PBS is how white burlesque has been. And that is a problem even still today. It's getting better, that's for sure. But back in the 1800s, they were not allowed to perform.
Oh, no. Only white people?
Only white people, and that was true for a while. Bad, not good. So in Paris, that was not true, as well as it was quite a symbol of class if you were dating a burlesque dancer in Paris.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Now, that was burlesque up until about 1910, 1915. In modern day, when we think of burlesque music, most people think of jazz. So that brings us to the 1920s. In her book about the history of burlesque, Dita Von Teese describes the 1920s as a time of national undress. Yeah. And it's because at the decade before this, shortly before this, we had like the Gibson Girl, where again you had to have like clothing everywhere and your hair, long hair, always up in a bun. So the 1920s, you go into your bob cuts, your flapper girl dresses, like everything's getting cinched up from sleeves to skirts to necklines are going down.
A little more skin.
Yeah.
A little more fun.
Yeah.
And so once, the 1920s kind of got into this like little more skin, the extreme reaction against it came in terms of states passing dress code laws.
Ooh, fun.
So in states and cities. So in Philadelphia, it was illegal to wear skirts more than 7.5 inches off the floor.
Sorry.
I'm
just, picturing my own hell.
In Utah, it was 3 inches above the ankle.
Wow.
And then there were similar regulations about your throat line. In Ohio, a lady could expose no more than 2 inches of the neck.
Oh my gosh. Like from what? From where it meets the chin almost? Or
That's an excellent question.
cops going
Which
around
way
with rulers?
can I go?
And so the 1920s is really when burlesque takes a very naughty turn in America. And Von Teese's belief on this, I have a tendency to agree with her, and I quote, "In Europe, people were allowed to drink to their heart's content, and women mostly kept their clothes on. In America, where alcohol and too much leg were both deemed illegal, they developed the art of the striptease. Call me crazy, but the connection is obvious."
So they outlaw alcohol and people have to get their kicks somewhere, is what she's saying?
Yeah, like if you restrict a nation too much into being conservative, they're gonna really rebel against it.
Gotcha.
That definitely hasn't proven itself throughout the course of time.
Nope, not at all.
No.
So 1920s is really where modern day burlesque was born, both among the blue-collar clientele and the New York elite. For those who have read Great Gatsby, I mean, he talks a lot about how really rich upper-class New York City men would go, like, slum it. Like, it was a very popular thing to go slumming in the shady speakeasies and watch a girl get naked. Mm-hmm. I mean, slumming it is
Listen
still popular with the rich.
jazz music.
So the 20s is when famous Billy Minsky started opening his theaters, starting with the National Winter Garden, and that's where burlesque got its real start. So Billy Minsky was responsible for burlesque dancers getting their very big break from the 20s up until his death in the mid-30s. And he was also responsible for keeping the city of New York City at bay with raids.
Oh, okay.
So
is he a mob guy?
I don't know, but like he must have been, because he was connected everywhere. Like when the police would come to raid the place, he would like talk them out of coming inside.
Uh-huh.
Right?
So it's sort of like what we talked about in with Stonewall, right?
Sure. I mean, he must have been.
I mean, he had the power to stop them, whereas Stonewall didn't.
Oh, okay, that's fair. I mean, I was just wondering if it was a similar connection where like the mob ran the
Similar
bars
action.
and they'd pay off the cops.
Yeah. I mean, the business was still illegal. Like the National Winter Garden did such a good job that he opened 2 more theaters uptown, including the Little Apollo on 125th Street. So with burlesque being so popular, law officials started paying more and more attention to it.
Oh.
And so Billy was able to keep a lot of the more strict, like, decency laws from shutting him down officially and getting his girls arrested. But what he would do is he would basically rig the theatrical lights, the footlights on the stage, so that they could change color. And there was a button at the front door to indicate if the cops were coming in or not. All right, so there was like a normal continue your striptease mode, and then when the lights turned colors, then you had the girls would go back and get changed into their Sunday school versions.
So green means go, red means cover it up.
Yeah.
Into it. Amazing.
And, Billy Minsky started this once due to how successful it was. Like, every speakeasy and burlesque theater in town started adopting this system. So he gave several of the 1920s and 1930s girls their start, but probably his most famous star was Gypsy Rose Lee, who came to fame in 1931. And she is definitely top 5 burlesque stars of all time. She started very young. Some would say obscenely young.
Ugh, gross.
Her mother was also a burlesque performer and got her started. And basically, when she started dancing in her early teens, which we're just going to glaze right past that.
Should we?
Sure. Her mom would get all this talk started around Gypsy because Gypsy would come into the dressing room and have these huge bouquet of roses waiting for her. And like having these anonymous adoring fans. The other girls would start talking about it. The producers would start talking about it. Gypsy started believing these things about herself. She found out years later that it was her mom faking it the entire time. But
really?
It worked because she became very quickly the most famous burlesque star in America due to the buzz around her.
Huh. That's some viral marketing for you. Some guerrilla marketing.
So she started performing and had just this amazing personality that she could get the entire audience riled up without taking a single piece of clothing off. So she would strip, and she had some amazing routines, but she didn't always have to.
Nice.
Yeah. Which again comes back to the art of burlesque, of seduction is folded into absolutely everything.
I mean, it might be super dark, but part of me is wondering how much of that is just, you have a minor on stage flirting and tempting.
She had a career up until the 70s.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
wait, when did she start? In the 30s?
30s. So she was active for 40 years, and her ability to just talk to men lasted all the way up until then. Huh. So the minor thing is a bad, true, but she had the ability to do the whole talk thing her entire life.
Oh, wow. Charming lady.
Mm-hmm. So during the 30s, feature strippers could earn salaries of $1,000 a week upwards, which is a lot.
Wow, even today,
now,
yeah.
That'd be cool.
However, the era was coming to an end. Billy Minsky died in 1932, and the productions he managed died slowly after. So his theater companies began shutting down. I should know this. It was either his son or his brother in the 50s would eventually move the business to Vegas to start the concept of the showgirl.
Oh, wow. So it's all tied together.
Yeah.
It's all in the family.
All one continuum.
But, so even though American burlesque was very popular up until the mid-30s, there was a moral crackdown on it at the end that led to its demise. In 1937, Mayor LaGuardia closed the remaining New York burlesque houses, dismissing them as purveyors of filth. Man.
And we named an airport after
that is
him?
one cranky airport.
It's not a good airport.
Hey, I prefer that to JFK fucking any day of the week.
New York doesn't have good options.
It's my favorite New York City airport. I will fight you to the death on this one.
Fight away. I'm saying that all New York City airports, it's a brilliant city that's really hard to fly through.
Low bar. Yeah. No, airport standards, low bar.
So, given that that live burlesque was being targeted and ended at the end of the 30s, it moved to Hollywood.
Ooh.
So in 1940s, burlesque moved into the cinema.
Oh, wow. Oh, all these lights. All the stars.
So this is actually very much a side effect of World War II. The pinup era brought forth a new style of burlesque.
Ah.
So, and I think this is kind of where burlesque fashion kind of ends for a lot of like classical performers, is with the 1950s pinup style.
And we're like still there, pretty much.
Pretty much. Like, there's definitely a modern take on it. And then, as you said, there's a lot of performances like Stargirls or the, I sent Marcella a photo. It's the Harry Potter burlesque show. Like,
I've been.
Yeah,
Nice.
there's like nerd performances that are homages to other things. And obviously there is like a modern take on fashion and burlesque. But definitely, if you're going for that like old school aesthetic, it's usually circled or like focusing around the 1950s.
Gotcha.
You can take a lot of liberty with how you define burlesque performance in the 1950s Hollywood. There are some very obvious performances like Evangeline the Oyster Girl and Lily St. Cyr. But then some would consider Marilyn Monroe's performances burlesque. Because she is just oozing sex appeal from every aspect. Mm-hmm. But she never takes her clothes off in most of them. You know, she can get full seduction done without the striptease element, which is like OG burlesque style. But that is not to say that she is the queen bee, even though she is the queen bee. Lily St. Cyr is one of my personal favorites. And I'm going to pull up the photos for Marcella and Colin. So if you go into the 1950 folder, you'll see a selection of ladies.
You really did your homework.
Yeah. I'm going to skip ahead to Lily St. Cyr. There's a very famous photo of her in a glass bathtub.
Ooh.
It was one of her most famous bits where she would get naked, and the glass bathtub had frosted sides so that you could see that she was naked, but you couldn't make up any particular detail of her.
Like playing The Sims.
Yeah. Spectacular. And like, she's just, again, she embodies what it means to be a burlesque performer. She's got the look, she's got the attitude. There's also a photo of her putting on a stocking. That was her bit. That was her performance in, I forget which movie this is in, but this was featured in a public release movie where she started mostly naked and then she would slowly put her undergarments on.
A little reverse striptease.
Perfection. Yeah. And then the 50s photos, I think, are spectacular because...
These are all stills from movies?
Yeah. So, or Lily St. Cyr in Son of Sinbad is a still of the movie Son of Sinbad. There's a photo of Joan Collins getting trained by burlesque dancer Candy Barr to be in a movie. And there's a photo of Gypsy Rose Lee, the OG.
Wow.
Yeah, and she's like in her late 30s at this point, early 40s. So she's still killing it.
Looking good.
Mm-hmm. And there's a photo of her laughing, which I think just shows how much her personality could come through and like how seductive just her being her was. Yeah. Gloria Knight's also in there. She's stunning. And there's also Sally Rand, very famous burlesque performer, and you can see in this photo that she's holding two fans. Fan dances have been a burlesque classic for freaking ever. So this is the classic thing where a scantily clad woman hides exactly how much skin she wants to reveal to you using fans. This actually has its origins in high society courtesans from Europe who would do it with a much smaller scale fan, like a hand fan, to like do that flirty eye dance with gentleman callers.
I see.
Yeah. And then it just got bigger and the girls had less clothes on. And I also had included in here a picture of a moral protest outside of a burlesque show.
Oh, what are they saying? What do the signs say?
Ban burlesque.
It's all men.
Yep, it's all men. I look at those guys and I think that they're the exact same caliber of person as the guy who tried to sue the Super Bowl for J-Lo's pole performance.
I was thinking the same thing. It's like, you made me horny, so I'm mad at you. I want this to stop.
So I think that the 1950s has got to be my favorite style just because, like, the hourglass shape is there. I love the hair, the makeup's, like, I'm just super into the 1950s style, so I included a lot of photos.
We're going to have to make a publicly available album.
Yeah. So, burlesque was popular in cinema, and also as live performance in, like, this new format that it was mostly striptease up until the 1970s. And then it went officially out of fashion in the 70s because media started featuring fully naked women from that point onwards.
Well, because we have home video coming out of the 70s.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
So as soon as, like, and also, like, especially comedy movies in the 70s and 80s, there were just a lot of boobs. Like, for no explicable reason. And I'm not shaming nudity,
boobs.
but I kind of like a dramaturgical boob.
One that makes sense within the story.
Yeah, and I guess part of me feels that way out of respect for the actress of, like, I want to believe that I'm taking my top off for a character reason and not because I'm in a Van Wilder movie.
Or Airplane.
Or Airplane. Airplane boobs, I think, are hilarious. I would do that. The comedy is there.
The comedy boob.
Yeah.
Satire boob.
Satire boob.
Parody boob.
So basically, burlesque kind of went the wayside of popularity for a while. It's made kind of a resurgence back. I would say that burlesque is mostly popular with, like, hipsters and, like, people who openly seek out burlesque. To see it featured on, like, a main, I don't know, like, when I was in school in London, we had the Hurly Burly show, which was really cool. But in terms of, like, how many times it's, like, a main thing on the West End is, like, they're still there, but it's not as common as it was in its heyday. Like, I have no better way to describe that. Like, you can always see a burlesque show, but I think there's a reason why burlesque is so associated with that, like, 30s to 50s timeline.
Right. That's what it was. In its prime.
Yeah. So, what is the difference between burlesque and cabaret? That's a complicated question. The definition back in the day was burlesque was a formal show. Cabaret was frequently hosted in a nightclub or pub. So that was the original defining line between the two.
Oh, okay. So what's the difference?
At first, not a lot.
Oh, okay.
Like, so...
Oh, the difference has increased over time? I thought it would be the inverse.
So it's increased a lot now. So the difference now... So modern day cabarets feature drag shows, stand-up routines, monologues, and original music. And people credit France in the 1800s as the birthplace of cabaret, including the Le Chat Noir Café and the Moulin Rouge. The French word cabaret means any performance or restaurant that serves liquor and offers entertainment. The first cabaret, known as Cabaret Artistique, was established in Paris, opened by an artist, and was renamed to Le Chat Noir not long after. Le Chat Noir formerly listed poetry, songs, and comic skits. Then it became a spot where many performers and artists were able to create new acts and construct new innovations with regards to the entertainment.
So cabaret specifically refers to a variety show.
Yes. But isn't it interesting that both cabaret and burlesque claim those two spaces as, like, their French birthplace?
Right. It's almost like they were...
Yeah.
It was almost like the same thing, and then they branched off into two different things.
Correct. So, I was on a cabaret website, where they were very trying to sell hard that they weren't a burlesque show. Mm-hmm. And it was mostly regarding the nudity aspect. So I think that I think cabaret wants to believe themselves as different from burlesque because of puritanical reasons.
Oh, really?
Like, they don't want to be associated with the seediness of burlesque without realizing that actually they're the same thing at their core. Mm-hmm. I think American burlesque has definitely gotten much more focused on the striptease element and has kind of left the... For some American burlesque shows, they have left the musical performance and the comedy behind. It's hard. Like, because cabaret is a pure variety vaudeville style show, and I do think that every MC for a burlesque show brings an element of comedy to it, but not in the same of like this is a stand-up set.
Gotcha.
However, you can still see quite a few burlesque shows that would also count as cabaret. So gotcha. I think that the two of them are actually much more similar than some would like to admit.
Yeah, that's super interesting because the Slipper Room is definitely a variety show, but considers itself a burlesque theater.
I really think that the only people who get too caught up in the difference are those who are trying to, like, hide the shame aspect.
Yeah, trying to class it up.
Yeah. When I just think... I don't particularly care about the difference between cabaret and burlesque. Like, boobies or no boobies, I'm game. I'm here. So, one important note to say about cabaret, if anyone is familiar with the famous Kander and Ebb cabaret show, it's a spectacular Broadway classic. It was made into a live-action movie starring Joel Grey and Liza Minnelli, and also featuring is Basil from Austin Powers. I forget the actual actor's name. But cabaret was moved its way into Germany in the early 20th century, and it became insanely popular. So the German cabaret, spelled with a K, opened in Berlin in 1900 by Baron Ernst von Wolfsungen.
Huh?
Sure,
Yeah, that sounds good.
Although it maintained the grandiose ambiance, it has created its own character by adding humor on their acts. So by the late 1920s, the German cabaret continued progressing and featuring musical entertainments for upper-class men, including artists, intellectuals, and writers, as well as entertaining the political banter. The German cabaret was used by leftists to express their opinions regarding the government, and this was very true in World War II Berlin. They were kind of the opposition voice until the Nazis came in and tried to shut that down. But for anyone who's actually seen the movie Cabaret, a huge theme in it from start to finish is nationalism. So cabaret still remains popular in Germany, and it still has a heart in Berlin. However, after post-World War II, the political commentary was greatly dimmed down.
Oh, that's a shame.
They may have changed it now. Like, we live in a crazy timeline.
We do.
If there was a time for German cabaret performances to get political again, this would be the time.
For sure.
Yeah. So, that is kind of where we land with burlesque style performances and cabaret.
Wow.
So, as I said, burlesque started falling out of fashion in the 1970s. By the time we hit the 1980s, there's kind of, I don't know if there was a void or an American need for something new. And that's when we get the beginning of a gentleman's club.
Oh.
Also frequently referred to as a strip club.
Ah.
Interesting.
So, in the 1920s, as part of burlesque performance, traveling circuses would have them. And the dancers would use the center poles of the tents as mechanisms to dance on.
Oh, really?
Which was the beginning
That's
of pole
how this
dancing
started?
in America. Yeah. So, Poles have been used for like acrobatic performances for quite some time. You have, I'm going to say it wrong, Malakham, which is a traditional Indian sport performed by men. They would basically use a center pole to perform acrobatic and yoga-inspired tricks. In China, you have the 2 poles that acrobats will jump between as like a Chinese acrobatic performance, and then like go horizontal on them. So whereas poles have always kind of been used for athletic reasons, it became part of the striptease in American circuses in the 1920s. They started making their ways into bars at the start of the 1950s, where ladies would be dancing on top of them while people are drinking. And then in the 1980s is between the 1970s and the 1980s, you start seeing gentlemen clubs pop up everywhere, and they all have stripper poles. I need to insert a quick correction in here. I want to briefly touch on the history of lap dances. The lap dance is kind of an hard thing to research the origin story of. Both New York City and San Francisco claim to have clubs that started the tradition around the same time in the 1970s. In the 1970s, New York's Melody Theater introduced audience participation and called it Mardi Gras. They claim this to be the origin of the lap dance. In San Francisco, there was Jim and Archie Mitchell, who had been running an adult movie house called the O'Farrell Theater. And in the 1970s, it started seeing a downturn in profits due to the popularity of at-home VHS copies of porn. They had to find a new way to generate business, and so they started advertising erotic dancers who would come and dance on the laps of their male patrons. At first, they started with having the girls being completely naked. The city immediately brought prostitution charges against the club owners and the women who were performing. The rule became that the dancers had to be wearing some form of clothing in order to perform the lap dance, and they found out that a G-string was just enough coverage in order to get away with it. The dancers of the San Francisco O'Farrell Theater would not have the prostitution charges against them dropped until 2004. Lap dancing remains a controversial subject across the United States, with rules varying across all 50 states. Some rules have a no alcohol and no nudity rule. Others will not allow lap dancing in any form. In the United Kingdom, lap dancing was not brought to popularity until the 1990s. And in Canada, again, you started seeing dances show up at random clubs in the 1970s. However, it didn't become very popular until 1990, where it really became a standard in Montreal nightclubs, and it would not become fully legalized until 1999.
No way.
Lol,
Wow.
what? Oh, it's younger than me.
So, I'm not going to throw shade at any go-go dancer, at any stripper. Like, pole dancing is motherfucking hard. Pole dancing started becoming a very popular, it started showing up in workout classes in the 90s. It started gaining popularity in the mid-2000s. Like, I knew people who were doing it as a workout while we were in high school.
Oh, really?
They definitely didn't tell everyone about it, but it was a thing. And today, I know so many women, including myself, who have tried pole dancing as a workout, and it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Marcella, have you done it as well?
I've played around one time. So I have friends who have done pole, and I've goofed around and showed how absolutely weak my core is.
Yeah,
that's my experience.
Extremely difficult, the core and upper body strength.
Absolutely.
It's super difficult. And so I've done it a couple times, and the times that I've done it, I was able to, I forget what the move is, but I've made my way onto the pole. I could get my hip around so that you do the little fly away thing where your hip is holding you up on the pole and your chest comes up and around the pole, and you take your arms off. That one's my favorite. Whee! So, and there are people as of right now who are campaigning to get pole dancing added to the Olympics because it is a massive feat of strength and beauty when done properly. Which brings me kind of to my next point is there are currently kind of factions in the pole dancing world. And I wanted to bring this up because, you know, we've gone through this entire journey of like what is burlesque performance, what is cabaret performance, the incredible amount of stigma given towards dancers and people who enjoy it. And it brings me to a question that has to do with any form of adult entertainment of what is the line between what is art and what is porn?
Yeah.
It's a hard question to ask or answer. And I would argue that with the obscene amount of talents that mostly women performers have is amazing. And there are male burlesque dancers. There are obviously male go-go dancers, but they only make up less than a third of the industry.
I don't know if there is much point in drawing a distinction. Like, are you trying to draw a distinction between what is, like, pornographic and what is art? Because I don't think there is a distinction. Like,
I guess the point I was trying to go with this is when watching the Super Bowl, we were watching with a group who was super on board with everything that was happening on screen.
They were very there for Shakira and J-Lo.
All right, and like the second she got on the pole, like all of us were like, ah! Right. And I guess the point I'm trying to sell home is I think there's a lot of people out there who have a very conservative view on what is involved with pole dancing. And to them, I would challenge them to actually look at performers who are doing this as an art form. I have two names to just throw out into the universe as of right now. I saw both of these girls perform at Flaming Saddles, which is a gay bar in West Hollywood. The first is Jordan Kensley. She is a great human being. I have a friend, Laura, who does quite a lot of pole dancing, and she's taken classes from her, and she was just absolutely lovely, and her performance was on point. And the other girl that we saw perform was Candace Kane, and she blew my fucking mind. like watching her, and not only that, but she gripped the entire bar into watching her. And like go-go dancers are always a thing at gay bars, right? It's just a staple. And she had every single set of eyes watching her. And like on one move, she was at the top of the pole, holding herself up just from like the knee pit of her right leg, stretching out with other things, which hopefully if you go on Instagram and look at her, like you'll be mind blown too. And in that one move, I saw like $300 to $500 worth of $1 bills make its way onto stage. Like,
that is so impressive.
I've never actually seen it rain before. Like, I've seen tips. I've tipped before, but that was the only time that I've seen an entire bar be like, ah!
That's so cool.
So, I don't know. I guess through this history of what is burlesque, what is cabaret, what is pole dancing, I just want to really drive home that it is an art form worth enjoying, worth celebrating, and I think pole dancing should make it into the Olympics because, yeah, that's
nice.
That's what I want to say.
Nice. That's a great way to bring it home.
Thank you for your dissertation.
Thank you so much, Meg. Holy crap. Okay, so listeners, we are going to have a probably a public folder where you can look at all those pictures that Megan mentions. And are there any other resources? We will plug those Instagram accounts that we mentioned. And are there any other resources we want to make sure to include?
Yeah, so Dina Von Teese, as I mentioned, has a great book that she wrote. Her book is called Burlesque and the Art of the Tease. It's a great overview of the history and also kind of the art and regards to burlesque performance. I highly recommend it.
All right, we'll link to some more information about that.
In terms of like modern burlesque stars, there's quite a few. She's probably one of the most famous. There's also the world famous Bob. She is self-billing as a female impersonator. She has performed as a drag queen.
Okay.
Right, despite being born with as a female. And her signature act is mixing a martini in her cleavage.
I really want to see that.
I'm intrigued.
I'm very intrigued. I mean, there's a lot of, I guess we don't have time to talk about it, but there's a lot about burlesque that is just like, that is very similar to drag. I mean, because it's an exaggerated performance of femininity. Anyway.
Yes. No, you're 100% right. I mean, drag and burlesque shows and cabaret shows, they happen all over the country. And they're quite a lot of fun. They come in all scopes of professional quality, I would say. Like, you have, like, the really well fine-tuned performances with the perfect sound cues and the perfect lighting cues with people who have been doing it for years and years and years. And then you have the amateurs, and you know what? I love seeing them all. Like, everyone has to get a start somewhere, and they need an enthusiastic voice to be out there and be, like, realistic of the fact that they paid $5 for this show. This person's getting their start.
Yeah.
So, in terms of, like, burlesque and, like, etiquette, I would say, the more as an audience member that you put into it, the more the dancer will give back to you. Like, there is an energy to be felt on stage, and so just going with an open mind and to be supportive and loving is key, and also respectful.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, primarily.
Yes.
Consent.
Yeah.
Always consent.
Hopefully you guys found this interesting and learned something about it.
I learned a lot.
Yeah.
That was really interesting.
Absolutely. I learned so much.
Thank you, Ken Burns, for that history of burlesque. Let's call it there.
All right. Let's call it there.
Okay, thank you for listening, everybody. Make sure to follow us on the social medias, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We are at Remedial Sex Ed. Remember, please tweet at us. Please email us. Please message us your questions for this coming season. We want to answer them here on the air. So please, get back to us with any sex question you happen to have.
That does it?
All right. Oh, make sure to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps. And, I just need constant validation, so just do it.
Jesus.
All right. Auf Wiedersehen. I am Megan.
I'm Marcella.
And I'm Colin.
Thank you
Bye.
for joining.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Concept contribute to the rearing of a mature person.
An absence of
Oh, yeah, you don't have to be thinking about sex.
it is. It continues in the